What is the final confession of a poisoner worth? Is it a deathbed truth, a final lie, or a weapon sharper than any blade? In the darkness before dawn, on the precipice of oblivion, the act of confession itself becomes the deadliest poison. Why do you think Kaelen is speaking now? Share your theories below. The guards threw me into this cell 3 days ago. They don't know I've been preparing for this moment for 20 years. The cold of the damp stone seeps into my bones, a familiar chill I have cultivated like a rare herb. It is the cold of the grave, and it has been my constant companion for 2 decades. They see an old man, broken and discarded. They see Kaelen, the Royal Poisoner, finally caught in a web of his own making. They are fools. This cell, this filth, this finality, it is all part of the recipe. My life has been a symphony of silence. Each measured drop of venom a note in a composition only I could hear. But every symphony must have its finale. Tonight, before the sun stains the sky with the pale hue of a coward's conscience, I will conduct mine. I will confess it all, not to the gods who abandoned me long ago, but to these stone walls. They, at least, are honest in their cruelty. They will remember when I am gone. The heavy iron door groaned open, breaking my reverie. A massive silhouette filled the frame, holding a flickering torch that stank of pitch and smoke. Goran, the chief jailer. His face was a topographical map of brutalities, scars crisscrossing features that had forgotten how to express anything but disdain. "Still breathing, old man?" he grumbled, his voice like gravel grinding under a boot. "We all breathe until we don't, Goran," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. It was the voice I used to discuss the vintage of a wine or the properties of a new root. Calm, measured, devoid of fear. Fear is a contaminant. The question is the quality of the breath. Yours, for instance, suggests a chronic inflammation of the lungs. Perhaps you should try a tea of thyme and lungwort. He spat on the straw-strewn floor, the gesture itself a punctuation of his contempt. "Spare me your witchery. The regent wants you gone by first light. The executioner is sharpening his axe." "An axe," I mused, allowing a dry, rasping laugh to escape my lips. So crude, so messy. It lacks artistry, don't you think? It speaks of rage, not purpose. "What do you want, poisoner? My last meal is not yet due, and I have no desire for your company." "I want to talk, Goran, and you will listen. More than that, you will record." I gestured to the small wooden stool and the wax tablet and stylus I had demanded as my final right. A man's last words, even a poisoner's, must be noted. It is the law. He grunted, but he sat, the stool creaking in protest under his weight. He was a man of simple duty, and the law, however inconvenient, was his compass. He picked up the stylus with thick, clumsy fingers. "Speak then. Confess your sins to the stone. They will be your only witness." I closed my eyes, not in prayer, but in remembrance. The past rushed in, not as a blur, but with the terrifying clarity of a masterwork painting. I began at the beginning, the true beginning. 20 years ago, I started, the words hanging in the frigid air. The great Emperor Valerius II died in his sleep. The court physicians spoke of a weak heart. The people mourned a strong leader, struck down too soon. The official chronicles recorded it as a tragedy of nature. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Goran. His stylus had stopped moving. "But it was not nature," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to absorb the very sound from the room. "It was me. I was the weak heart. I was the tragedy." I described the night with an apothecary's precision. The fire in the gray hearth, casting long, dancing shadows. The scent of beeswax and old parchment. The emperor, a robust man in his prime, sipping his nightly cordial, a blend of honey, warm milk, and a tincture of valerian to aid his sleep. A harmless concoction, until I added my own ingredient. "It was called the weaver's sigh," I explained, almost fondly. "A distillate from a rare mountain flower, colorless, odorless, tasteless. It does not convulse or choke. It simply convinces the heart to rest. Permanently, the lungs follow suit. There is no pain, no struggle, just a gentle inexorable closing of the book. Goran was staring at me now, his earlier contempt replaced by a morbid, horrified fascination. This was the power of the story. Not the facts, but the feeling. I was making him see it, smell it, feel the quiet horror of that royal bedchamber. I stood in the shadows by the door, as was my duty. I continued, my gaze fixed on a crack in the ceiling, seeing not stone, but the past. I watched his chest rise and fall, the rhythm slowing like a pendulum winding down. I counted the breaths. 17. Then silence. A silence so profound it felt like the world itself had stopped. And then the scream of the chambermaid the next morning, a sound that tore the illusion of peace to shreds. I fell silent, letting the weight of the confession settle in the cell. The only sound was the sputtering of the torch in Goran's ragged breath. "Why?" he finally asked, the single word laden with a confusion I had long since abandoned. "Why?" I repeated, a bitter smile touching my lips. "That is the only question that matters, isn't it? Not the how or the when, but the why." I leaned forward, chains around my wrists clinking softly. The Emperor was a good man, a just ruler. He was loved by his people, respected by his enemies. His death plunged this empire into an age of shadows from which it has never emerged. I paused again, a deliberate, calculated silence, a storyteller's pause. I had given him the crime. I had given him the murderer, but I had withheld the engine of the plot. "Who ordered it, Goran?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the small space. "Who held the leash of the Royal Poisoner and pointed him at the very heart of the Empire?" He was leaning forward now, his body tense, the tablet forgotten in his lap. The jailer had become the audience, captive to my tale. I sat back, the stone cold against my spine. That is a story for another candle. This one is almost spent. As if on cue, the torch flickered, plunging the cell into a deeper darkness. Goran jerked, startled out of a spell I had woven. He stood up abruptly, the stool scraping against the floor. "Monster," he hissed, but the word lacked its earlier conviction. Now it was tinged with fear. "We are all monsters here, jailer," I said softly, closing my eyes once more. "Some of us just wear our horrors on the inside. Now leave me. The dawn is not yet here, and I have more ghosts to dine with before I join them." The door slammed shut, the iron bolt sliding home with a sound of finality. But it was not an end. It was an overture. And in the profound darkness, I smiled. The first dose of the truth had been administered. The poison was in the blood. Now we wait for the cure, or the kill. Goran returned with the dawn. He did not speak as he placed a bowl of watery gruel and a clay cup of water through the slot in the door. But his eyes, those hard chips of flint, held a new, unsettled light. He had slept with my confession, and it had infected his dreams. I could see it in the weary slump of his shoulders. The story was already working its way through him, a slow, systemic poison. He retrieved the wax tablet and sat on the stool, his posture less defiant, more that of a reluctant scribe to a dark gospel. "You did not finish," he stated, his voice rough. "Stories, like fine poisons, must be measured," I replied, sipping the tepid water. "An overdose numbs the senses. A deficiency fails to achieve the desired effect." We ended with a question. Let us begin with its consequence. I settled back against the wall, the chill a familiar companion now. The death of Valerius II left a throne and a vacuum. Nature and politics abhor a vacuum. From the grief and chaos emerged two figures, the young hawk and the crow. "Speak plainly, poisoner." "Very well." The young hawk was Prince Valerius, the third of his name, barely 16, all sharp angles and idealism, with eyes that still believed the world could be shaped by honor and just laws. He was his father's son in face, but the late emperor's steel had not yet been tempered in his soul. He was raw, vulnerable. "And the crow?" Goran asked, his stylus poised. "Lord Malachar, the emperor's younger brother. Where Valerius was light, Malachar was shadow. Where the boy was fire, the man was ice." He did not smile, he assessed. He did not speak. He pronounced. As the prince's uncle and the most powerful lord in the realm, he named himself Lord Regent to guide the fledgling emperor until he could fly on his own. A noble sentiment, don't you think? I let the irony hang in the air, thick and cloying as incense. My first audience with the new regent was not in the glittering throne room, but in his private solar. The windows were shuttered, the room lit by a single, large candle that cast more shadow than light. He stood before a map of the empire, his hands clasped behind his back. "Kaelen," he began, without turning. "My brother trusted you implicitly. He considered your talents a necessary, if distasteful, tool of statecraft. I remained silent, waiting. One does not speak to a gathering storm." He turned then, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky moments before a blizzard. "The boy is soft. His heart is his father's, but his will is his mother's. He is surrounded by whispers and pretty lies. He believes in the inherent goodness of men." Malachar picked up a heavy, crystal paperweight from his desk, turning it over in his hands. "A kingdom built on goodness is a castle built on sand. It will be washed away by the first tide of ambition. My brother understood this. He used you to solidify his power, to remove obstacles too delicate for the public spectacle of the axe. This was a lie, of course. The old emperor had used me sparingly, and only against external threats who could not be reached by sword or law. But I said nothing. Correction is a luxury for those who are not in a cage of another's making. The obstacles now," Malachar continued, placing the paperweight down with a soft, definitive thud, "are internal. They cling to the boy, filling his head with dreams of peace and prosperity. They would have him open our borders, dilute our traditions, weaken our defenses. They are a cancer in the court, and a cancer must be cut out." He looked at me, and the command was as clear as if he had shouted it. "Your first task in this new era is to remove Lord Evran." Goran shifted on his stool. "Lord Evran? The one they called the Laughing Lord?" "The very same," I said, a faint echo of the man's boisterous laughter seeming to reverberate in the dank cell. A man of immense wealth and larger heart. He was the first to make the young emperor laugh after his father's death. He organized feasts for the poor, sponsored bardic tournaments, and believed that a ruler's strength came from a love of his people, not their fear. To Malachar, he was not just a fool, he was a pathogen. The order was clear, but the method that was to be my art, it could not look like murder. The boy emperor adored him. His death had to be a tragedy, an accident, a lesson to the court on the fragility of life, and by extension, the need for a firm, unyielding hand on the tiller. I described the autumn hunt, the forest a tapestry of gold and crimson, the sound of horns, the baying of hounds, the thunder of hooves. Lord Evran, a splash of vibrant blue on a great chestnut stallion, his laughter ringing out as he chased a stag. I was there among the lesser courtiers, my horse keeping a steady, unremarkable pace. "The key," I explained to Goran, "is not always a poison ingested. Sometimes it is a poison of circumstance." I had spent days prior preparing a small, hollow thorn filled with a neurotoxin derived from a species of bark beetle. The toxin itself was mild, but its effect was singular and precise. It caused a sudden, violent, and temporary spasm in whichever muscle group it entered. As Evran charged through a thicket, leaning low over his horse's neck, I maneuvered close. It was the work of a moment. A flick of the wrist, the thorn embedded in the flank of his stallion. Not enough to kill, or even seriously harm the beast. Just enough to startle it. I closed my eyes, seeing it all again. The horse screamed, high-pitched sound of surprise and pain. It bucked, not wildly, but with a sudden, powerful jerk. Lord Evran, caught in the momentum of his own exuberance, was thrown from the saddle, his foot caught in the stirrup. The silence in the cell was absolute. Goran had stopped breathing. "He was dragged," I said, my voice flat empty, "through the bracken, over the roots of ancient oaks." By the time the horse was calmed, the Laughing Lord was silent. His neck was broken, The court physicians called it a terrible riding accident. The young emperor wept at his funeral, and Malachir stood by the boy's side, a hand on his shoulder, the very picture of stern, comforting strength. I looked at Goran. His face was pale. That was the first lesson I taught the young emperor. I whispered, a lesson in grief and random chance, a lesson crafted by the regent and delivered by my hand. The crow had plucked the first feather from the young hawk's wing, all while pretending to shield him from a storm. I gestured to the empty cup. The story is a thirsty business, jailer, and we have only just begun to scrape the surface of the rot. Goran handed me a fresh cup of water. His movements were slower now, less efficient. The story was a weight on him, a burden he had not asked to carry, but could not bring himself to discard. He sat back down, the wax tablet waiting. He was no longer just a jailer recording a confession. He was a chronicler of a hidden history, and the gravity of it was settling upon him. The Laughing Lord's death served its purpose. I continued, the memory of the forest floor now replaced by the opulent, suffocating halls of the palace. A shadow fell over the young emperor's court. The vibrant silks and boisterous debates seemed muted. Laughter felt like a transgression, and in that silence Malachir's influence grew, a creeping ivy choking the life from the young hawk's reign. My next target was chosen with a surgeon's precision. Not a boisterous lord this time, but a woman, Lady Seraphine. Goran's brow furrowed. The queen's confidant. The very same. The Queen Anya's dearest friend since childhood, her chief lady-in-waiting. Where the queen was a portrait of serene, melancholic beauty, Seraphine was the vibrant frame that held her together. She was the one who could still coax a genuine smile from the grieving widow, who reminded her of a life beyond black silks and courtly duty. Malachir's reasoning was, as always, cloaked in cold pragmatism. He summoned me to the shuttered solar. The queen's grief is a weakness, he declared, his voice cutting the stillness. She clings to the past, to her son, with a desperate sentimentality. She whispers in his ear, filling his head with his father's ghost. She undermines my authority, and by extension, the stability of the realm. He paced before the map, a predator surveying his territory. Lady Seraphine is the source of this poison. She validates the queen's hesitance, encourages her resistance. She is the conduit of this sentimental weakness. She must be severed. The order was given, but this time, a strange resistance stirred within me, a foreign contaminant in the calm pool of my compliance. Lady Seraphine was no political threat. She was a friend. Her crime was offering comfort. The method was to be a classic, I told Goran. A shared carafe of spiced wine between the queen and her lady and the queen's solar in the evening. It was a ritual. I would ensure the carafe was treated before it reached them. A tincture of devil's trumpet, refined to induce a paralysis of the heart. It would appear as a sudden, fatal seizure. The night of the deed, I remember the scent of beeswax and dried roses in the queen's chambers. I remember the two women sitting by the fire, their heads close together, speaking in hushed tones. Seraphine was embroidering, her needle flashing in the firelight, while the queen stared into the flames. I, as the royal taster's chief aide, was there to perform a final, perfunctory check of the evening refreshments, a hollow ritual, as I was the one who had prepared the threat. My hands did not shake as I poured the 2 cups from the treated carafe. My breath was even. I had done this 100 times before. As I handed the silver cup to Lady Seraphine, our fingers brushed, and she looked up at me. I paused, the memory as vivid and painful as the day it happened. Goran leaned forward, his own breath held. She had kind eyes, I whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. A deep, warm brown, and in them, there was no suspicion, no fear. There was a simple, fleeting gratitude for the service. A tiny, human connection, and in that moment, I did not see a political obstacle to be removed. I saw my daughter, Lyra. The confession hung in the air, raw and exposed. I had never spoken her name in this context, never allowed the 2 worlds to collide. The resemblance was not physical. It was in the spirit. The same unguarded goodness, the same belief in the fundamental decency of those around them. Lyra had looked at me with those same eyes once, before she learned what her father truly was. A cold knot tightened in my chest. I wanted to stop it, to knock the cup from her hand, to shout a warning, but I was a statue, carved from ice and duty. I watched as she took a sip, smiling at something the Queen said. I made my excuses and left the room, my steps echoing in the cavernous hallway. I counted them, 27 steps before I heard the first, muffled cry from the Queen's solar. It was not a scream of terror, but one of disbelief, of shattered reality. The official record states that Lady Seraphine died of a sudden failure of the heart. The Queen, they say, was so traumatized she retreated further into herself, becoming the silent, ghostly figure you see today. Malachar expressed his condolences, stating that sometimes the frailest hearts are broken by grief. He had achieved his goal. The Queen was now truly alone, isolated, her most trusted voice silenced forever. I looked at Goran, my own eyes bleak. But that is not the truth I confess to you today, jailer. The truth is, Lady Seraphine did not die because she was a threat to the crown. She died because in her eyes, I saw the ghost of my own child, and I was too much of a coward to save her. That was the night the great Kaelen, the master poisoner, began to poison himself. The first drop of regret had been administered, and let me tell you, it is the only venom for which there is no antidote. The silence that followed my confession about Lady Seraphine was different from the others. It was not the silence of horror, nor of grim fascination. It was a heavy, uncomfortable quiet, the kind that fills a room after a sacred object has been shattered. Goran did not fidget or grunt. He simply sat, his large hands resting on his knees, the stylus forgotten. He was staring at the grimy floor, but I knew he was not seeing it. He was seeing the kind eyes of a woman he never knew, and the ghost of a daughter I should have protected. After a long while, he spoke, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "You spoke of your daughter." The words were not an accusation. They were a key, offered to a lock I had kept sealed for decades. The mention of Lyra, here in this filth, felt like a desecration. And yet, was this not the entire purpose? To air the rot, to expose every festering wound to the cleansing fire of truth. "Lyra," I said, and the name was a prayer and a curse on my lips. It was a name I had not allowed myself to speak aloud in 20 years, keeping it locked away in a vault of memory where the poison of my life could not touch it. But now the vault had been breached. To understand the poisoner, you must first understand the father. I began, my gaze turning inward. And to understand the father, you must know what he loved and what he lost. I closed my eyes, and the damp, foul-smelling cell dissolved. I was back in my modest apothecary's workshop within the palace grounds, sunlight streaming through the high windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust. The air was thick with the scent of drying herbs, crushed petals, and earthy roots, a perfume of life, not death. Lyra was my antithesis. Where I dealt in shadows, she was pure light. She had her mother's hair, the color of summer wheat, and eyes the shade of a forest stream. Clear, bright, and endlessly curious. Her mother died when Lyra was young. A fever no tincture could cure. It was my first, brutal lesson in the limits of my art. I could end life with a whisper, but I could not always preserve it. I raised her surrounded by my work, but I crafted a beautiful life for her. I was the royal apothecary, a healer, a master of remedies. She believed it. She would sit on a high stool in the corner of my workshop, her small legs swinging, as I taught her the benign side of my craft. How to soothe a burn with aloe, how to brew a tea for a troubled stomach, how to identify a mushroom that could feed a family versus one that could end a line of kings. A genuine smile, the first in a lifetime, touched my cracked lips. She was a natural. Her hands were steadier than mine, her intuition sharper. She could sense the properties of a leaf just by crushing it between her fingers and breathing in its scent. I was so proud. I saw in her a future I could never have, a life of service in the light. using the knowledge I had perverted for darkness to truly heal. But the palace is a place of whispers. She grew older. The questions began. Why did the stern Lord Malachor visit so often, speaking in hushed tones? Why did I sometimes leave the workshop late at night, returning with the dawn, my clothes smelling not of herbs, but of cold stone and something metallic she could not name? The lie began to fray. I saw the first flicker of doubt in her eyes when she was 15. I had promised to take her to the midsummer festival. I had bought her a ribbon, blue like her eyes. But Malachor summoned me. A trade envoy from a rival kingdom was proving obstinate. My presence was required. I made an excuse, a flimsy one about a rare plant that could only be harvested under the full moon. The disappointment in her eyes was a sharper poison than any I had ever concocted. Goran was listening, utterly still. The chronicler of kings and assassins had become a witness to a single broken heart. The end came on her 17th birthday. I said, the words ash in my mouth. The memory was a wound that had never healed, only festered under a scar of willful neglect. She confronted me. Here, in this very palace. She had overheard 2 guards talking, their words laced with dark implication and fearful respect. They spoke of the Shadow Weaver, the Emperor's personal blade in the dark. They spoke of me. I tried to deny it, to weave another layer of the beautiful lie. But she was no longer a child to be placated. She stood there, in the doorway of my workshop, the young woman I had created from light and love, and her face crumbled. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "All those nights, all those people, Lord Evran, Lady Seraphine, did you make their heart stop?" I had to stop. The memory of physical pressure on my chest, the image of her, the betrayal in those forest stream eyes, was more than I could bear. I could not lie to her. My silence was my confession. She looked at me as if seeing a monster for the first time. The father she adored was a phantom. In his place stood a stranger, a creature of venom and deceit. "You are not a healer," she whispered, the words lashing me like a whip. "You are a plague." She turned and ran. I never saw her alive again. The cell returned, cold and real. The sunlight of memory was gone, replaced by the perpetual gloom of the dungeon. 3 days later, I said, my voice a hollow echo. Her body was found in a narrow alley near the docks. The city watch called her robbery. Her purse was gone. They said she had been asking questions in the wrong parts of the city, looking for proof about her father. I looked directly at Goran, my eyes dry and burning, but I knew. The proof she found was her death sentence. Malachor would not have allowed the truth to walk free, not even in the form of my daughter. Her death was my final and most devastating lesson. I had spent a lifetime brewing poisons, but the most corrosive one of all was the truth I had hidden from my own child. The daughter I sought to protect from the world was ultimately destroyed by the world I built for her. I fell back against the wall, spent. From that day on, Goran, I was a ghost. I performed my duties for Malachor with the soulless efficiency of an automaton. The art was gone. The purpose was gone. All that remained was the memory of a girl on a stool, swinging her legs, believing her father was a good man, and the crushing weight of knowing that I had poisoned the one pure thing in my life, long before any toxin ever touched her lips. The memory of Lyra hung in the cell like a shroud, so palpable I felt I could reach out and touch the rough wool of her favorite cloak. Goran did not speak for a long time. He simply sat, a mountain of a man humbled by the intimate, crushing weight of a father's grief. The air was thick with it, a miasma more suffocating than the dungeon's foul breath. When he finally moved, it was to pour more water from his skin into my cup. The gesture was slow, deliberate, almost reverent. He was no longer tending to a prisoner, but to a relic of a shared, human tragedy. He placed the cup within my reach and sat back down, his eyes avoiding mine, fixed on the dancing flame of his torch as if seeking answers in its chaotic light. "After Lyra," I began, my voice raspy from the unshed tears of 2 decades. The world lost its color. Sounds became muffled, tastes turned to ash. I was a shell, a meticulously crafted vial emptied of its contents. I moved through my duties for Malachor like a sleepwalker. The thrill of the art, the intellectual puzzle of the perfect, untraceable death, it was all gone. It had died with my daughter in that alley. For months, I was a ghost in the palace. I prepared the poisons. I administered them. Men and women died on my command, but I felt nothing. I was the perfect weapon Malachor had always wanted. Utterly ruthless, because I was utterly hollow. He mistook my desolation for unwavering loyalty. It was his first, and perhaps only, true miscalculation regarding me. Then came the order for Lord Theron. Goran's head lifted slightly at the name. Theron was a name that still carried weight, even in the dungeons. A name spoken in whispers. Lord Theron, I repeated, and for the first time since beginning my confession, I felt a spark, a faint ember of the man I once was. Young, fiery, and fiercely idealistic. He was from a minor noble house in the northern marches, but his voice in the council chambers roared like a lion. He challenged Malachor's policies openly, decrying the isolationism, the paranoia, the rule by dagger in the dark. He was everything the old emperor had valued, and everything the new regent despised. Malachor's command was simple. The northern cub has grown too bold. His rhetoric inspires dissent. He speaks of the late emperor's legacy, but he twists it into a call for rebellion. He is to be silenced, permanently. Make it an ague, a fever that consumes him in his sleep. The task was straightforward. A man in his own castle, surrounded by his own people. It required subtlety, but it was well within my capabilities. I gathered the ingredients for the shivering death, a poison that mimics a violent fever, breaking the victim with heat and chills until the heart gives out. I prepared my travel satchel. I was ready to become the ghost once more. And then I saw his portrait. I paused, letting the significance of the moment settle. A court painter had done a study of the young lords. Malachor had it in his solar, a tool for identifying potential threats and allies. I saw Theron's face for the first time. He was not handsome in a classical sense. His face was all sharp angles and defiance, hawk's face. But it was his eyes. My breath caught. The ember in my chest glowed brighter. They were Lyra's eyes. The same clear, uncompromising gray. The same fire of conviction. The same stubborn belief that the world could, and should, be better. It was not a physical resemblance. It was a resemblance of the soul. Staring at that portrait was like having a ghost punch through the ice that had encased my heart. Standing there in Malachor's solar, the order burning a hole in my mind, something inside me shattered. Or perhaps it was the first thing that had been whole in years, finally reawakening. I could not do it. I could not extinguish another one of those lights. Not again. To kill Theron would be to kill Lyra a second time. It would be the final, absolute surrender of my soul. So I made a choice, I said, my voice gaining a sliver of its old steel. For the first time in 20 years of service, I chose to disobey. But a direct refusal was a death sentence, and a useless one. It would not save Theron. No, I had to be smarter. I had to use the regent's own weapons against him. I went to Lord Theron's castle as ordered. I presented myself as a royal physician, sent by the concerned regent to tend to a minor ailment the lord was rumored to be suffering from. A clever lie by Malachor to get me inside. I was granted a private audience. I will never forget the look on his face when I closed the door to his study and told him the truth. Not the whole truth, but enough. My lord, I said, my voice low and urgent. You are not ill. You are a target. The regent has sent me here not to heal you, but to kill you. He did not call for his guards. He did not reach for his sword. He simply looked at me with those Lyra eyes, calm and assessing. Why are you telling me this? Because, I said, the words feeling alien and powerful on my tongue. For once, I wished to be an antidote and not a poison. I laid out the plan. I would fake his death. I had brought with me a rare resin from the southern islands that, when ingested, would induce a state of catalepsy so profound it was indistinguishable from death. His heart would slow to a whisper. his skin grow cold. For 3 days, he would be a corpse. I instructed his most trusted captain on what to do: to place him in the family crypt, to watch for the slightest movement, to have a fast horse ready. And then, I told Goran, a true, grim smile finally gracing my lips. I returned to the capital. I stood before Malachur, and I told him the deed was done. I described Lord Theron's feverish and in clinical detail. I told him the body had been sealed in the crypt, as was their northern custom. Malachur believed me. He praised my efficiency. The official word spread: Lord Theron, dead of sudden fever. The northern marches mourned. Malachur's court grew quieter, more subdued. And I, Kaelen the Hollow, the ghost, felt something I had not felt in 2 decades. A flicker of hope. A single, defiant act of mercy, hidden in the heart of the Empire's darkness. I had saved a man who reminded me of my daughter, and in doing so I had, perhaps, begun to save what was left of my own soul. The flicker of defiance I had felt after saving Theron was a dangerous, intoxicating thing. It was a tiny, shielded flame in the vast darkness of my existence, and I guarded it with the desperation of a man who had found his last ember of warmth in a frozen wasteland. For a time, the simple knowledge that I had thwarted Malachur, that a just voice still breathed because of my choice, was enough to make the gruel taste less like ash and the dungeon's chill feel less absolute. Goran, sensing the shift in my tone, leaned forward. The story of Theron had lit a different kind of fire in him, not the grim horror of the earlier tales, but the spark of a rebellion. He was no longer just a witness to decay. He was hearing the first whispered notes of resistance. But hope is a fragile vessel in a storm, I continued, the memory of that brief respite souring. And Malachur was the storm itself. He could sense a change in the wind, a shift in the current, even if he could not see its source. My act of salvation made me bolder, and in my boldness, I grew careless. I had challenged the crow, and the crow never forgets. The next target was Lord Valerian. Goran's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The old wolf. The very same. I nodded. The battle marshal of the Empire. A man whose loyalty to the throne was as unshakable as the mountains he hailed from. He had fought alongside Malachur and the late emperor in their youth. His face was a roadmap of old wars, and his voice in the war council was law. But his loyalty was to the crown, not to the regent who sat behind it. Malachur's reasoning was colder than the midwinter grave. The old wolf was grown sentimental in his dotage, he told me, his voice like grinding stones in the quiet of his solar. He questions the need for the new troop levies. He speaks to the young emperor of his father's strategies, of diplomacy before the sword. He reminds the boy of a time when we were not so fearful. He undermines the narrative of perpetual threat that keeps us strong. The order was given, but this time there was a new edge to Malachur's command. He watched me as he spoke, his wintry eyes searching for a crack, a flicker of hesitation. You will do this yourself, Kaelen. A simple thing. A shared toast of fine brandy in his own hall after the war council. He trusts you. He sees you as a fellow relic of his old friend's court. The trust of an honest man, I murmured, the shame of it a bitter taste. It is a heavier burden than the hatred of 1,000 enemies. I knew then that this was a test. My loyalty was being weighed. To refuse was to sign my own death warrant and reveal my hand. To obey was to murder one of the last truly good men in the Empire, and to extinguish the flame of my own rebellion forever. I looked at my hands, the tools of my damnation. I prepared the poison, a classic once more. Heartbane, distilled from the seeds of a common garden plant, fast, effective, and in an old man, easily mistaken for a sudden fit of apoplexy. I went to Lord Valerian's chambers that evening, the vial a cold, accusing weight against my skin. The old wolf was in a jovial mood. He poured 2 glasses of his finest amber brandy, the fire crackling in the hearth. To old times, Kaelen, he boomed, his voice still echoing with the ghosts of past battles. To your master, my friend. I miss him every day. This court has become a nest of spiders since he left us. He raised his glass. I raised mine. The moment stretched, an eternity in a heartbeat. I could see the reflection of the fire in the deep, golden liquid of my glass. I saw my own face, a gaunt, haunted mask, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I could not do it. But as I opened my mouth to speak, to warn him, to throw the glass into the fire, the door to his chambers opened. Goran tensed, his grip tightening on his knees. It was not a servant. It was Malachir himself, flanked by two of his personal guard, the Silent Sisters. They moved without a sound. Malachir's face was a calm, impassive mask. "To old times indeed, Valerian," Malachir said, his voice smooth as oiled silk. He walked forward, plucking the glass from my numb fingers. He sniffed it, a connoisseur appreciating the bouquet. Then he looked at me, and in that look I saw everything. He knew. He had known about Theron. He had known I would hesitate here. This was not an execution. It was a demonstration. Before Lord Valerian could even react, Malachir turned and offered him the glass. "A token from your old friend. Drink." The old wolf, confused but trusting, took the glass. He looked from Malachir to me, a dawning horror in his eyes. He understood then, in that final moment, the true nature of the web he was in. He drank. It was a gesture of defiance, of accepting his fate with the courage of a soldier. I stood there, paralyzed, as the poison I had brewed took the life of a man I respected. He did not cry out. He simply looked at me, his eyes holding not accusation, but a profound, weary disappointment. Then he slumped forward, his head landing on the table with a soft, final thud. Malachir turned to me. "A lesson, Kaelen," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. And loyalty," he added, his gaze piercing through me, "must be absolute. Clean this up." He and his Silent Sisters left as quietly as they had come. I was alone with the corpse of a good man, killed by my poison, delivered by my master's hand. I had not administered the death blow, but I had forged the blade. I was just as culpable. That night, I told Goran, my voice hollow once more, I learned the true depth of Malachir's cunning. He had used me to prove a point, not just to the court, but to me. He had shown me that even my rebellion was within his calculations. He was not just a storm. He was the sea itself, and I was a drowning man, my single gasp of air nothing but a bubble soon to pop. I had saved Theron, but in doing so, I had condemned Valerian. There is no antidote for that. The memory of Lord Valerian's final, disappointed gaze was a brand on my soul. In the ensuing silence of the cell, I could still hear the soft, final thud of his head meeting the oak table. Goran, too, seemed to feel the weight of that moment. He had shifted from a reluctant scribe to a man caught in the riptide of a tragedy he could not stop. His own broad shoulders slumped under the burden of the story. "That was the moment," I said, my voice scraping against the stillness, "when I understood the true architecture of my prison. The walls were not stone, but Malachir's will. The bars were not iron, but my own compromised soul. I had dared to hope, to rebel, and in response, he had forced me to be an accomplice in the murder of an icon. He wanted me to know that my hands would never be clean, that any flicker of light I tried to kindle, he would use to burn the world down. For weeks, I moved through the palace like the ghost I had once pretended to be. I was a puppet with cut strings, waiting for the puppeteer to discard me. Malachir watched me, a vulture observing a dying beast, waiting for the last twitch of resistance to fade. A strange thing happens when hope is utterly extinguished. Fear dies with it. I had nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature of all. It was then that I began to truly listen, not to the words spoken in council, but to the silences between them, not to the proclamations, but to the whispers in the servants' passages. I started to piece together a puzzle I had been too blind, too complicit, to see before, the puzzle of Emperor Valerius II's death. I leaned forward, the chains clinking a soft, metallic accompaniment to my lowering voice. Goran unconsciously mirrored my movement, the space between us shrinking, charged with the gravity of what was to come. For 20 years, I had carried the weight of that regicide. I was the instrument, but I had never truly questioned the hand that wielded me. Malachir had given the order, of that I was certain. It was the foundation upon which his power was built. But as I sifted through the ashes of my memory, I began to see other shadows in the flame. Let me paint you the picture of that night, Goran, not as the unfeeling instrument, but as the man I have become, a man who sees the web, not just a fly. The Queen, Anya, I began. She was younger then, a rose in full bloom, but her marriage to Valerius II was one of politics, not passion. He was a warrior king, often away on campaign. She was left in a gilded cage, her only solace her son, the young prince, and her circle of ladies. There were whispers, even then, of a certain melancholy that clung to her, a distance in her eyes when she looked at her husband. Did she see his death as a release from a gilded cage? Did she covet the power of the queen regent for her son, free from the shadow of a husband who was more a legend than a man? Goran's eyes widened. The queen was a sacred figure, a symbol of enduring grief. To paint her with such a brush was heresy. Then consider the young Prince Valerius himself. I continued, pressing my advantage, watching the seeds of doubt take root in the jailer's mind. He adored his father, yes, but he was a boy straining against the leash of a giant's legacy. He had his own ideas, his own dreams for the empire, dreams his father, set in his ways, may have seen as naive, even dangerous. The crown prince is always just one heartbeat away from ultimate power, and hearts can be made to stop. And of course, there was Malachir, I said, spreading my hands. The obvious choice, the ambitious younger brother, forever in the shadow of the sun. With Valerius II gone, he could rule as regent, molding the boy in his own image, wielding the power of the throne without the burden of the crown. Motive, opportunity means, through me, it was a perfect, elegant crime. I had believed it was him. For 20 years, I had accepted it as fact. But now I was not so sure. I paused a long, deliberate silence, letting the specters of the queen, the prince, and the regent dance in the dim light between us. The night I killed the emperor, I whispered. I entered his chamber as he slept. The weaver's sigh was in a vial, warm from my own body heat. I approached his bedside, and I saw something I had buried because it did not fit the simple narrative. On his nightstand, next to the empty cordial glass, was a single, fresh white petal from a moonwood orchid, a flower so rare it only grew in the private conservatory of the queen, a flower the emperor was known to be violently allergic to. His physicians had strictly forbidden them from his presence. Goran stared, his mind racing. I could see it in his eyes. He was connecting the dots I had laid out. I thought nothing of it then. A servant's error, perhaps. But now I see it as a sign. A failed attempt, or a deliberate one, designed to point a finger away from a poison, to make it look like a tragic accident, in case my own methods were discovered. I leaned back, the stone cold against my spine, my confession hanging in the air like a sword. I administered the weaver's sigh. I watched him die. I am guilty, but I was a single thread in a much larger, darker tapestry. The hand that guided me. I believed it was Malachir's. But what if I was wrong? What if the true architect of the emperor's death was far more cunning, hiding in plain sight, using Malachir's ambition as a shield and my compliance as the blade? I looked at Goran, my eyes holding his. That is the confession within the confession, jailer. The poison was mine, but the true venom that came from another. And the greatest sin of my life may not have been the murders I committed, but the one truth I failed to see. The silence that followed was a taut wire, vibrating with the implications of my words. I had thrown the entire foundation of Goran's understanding into a chasm of doubt. The queen, the young emperor? It was unthinkable. And yet, the white petal from the moonwood orchid was a fact, a tiny, poisonous detail that refused to be ignored. He stared at me, his jaw working soundlessly, the simple world of right and wrong he inhabited crumbling into dust. "You speak in circles, Poisoner," he finally growled, but the conviction was gone from his voice, replaced by a confused frustration. "You say you killed the Emperor. Then you point fingers at shadows. What is the truth?" "The truth is a many-headed serpent," I replied, my voice weary, "and I have fed each of its mouths. But you are right. It is time to stop pointing at shadows and to name the ghost that has haunted this story from the beginning. The ghost I have been too much a coward to face." I took a slow, deliberate breath, as if steeling myself for a physical blow. The air in the cell grew thick, heavy with a final, terrible anticipation. For 20 years, I believed the order to kill Emperor Valerius II came from Malachor. It was the only thing that made sense. It fit the narrative of the ambitious brother, the power-hungry regent. It was clean, tidy. It allowed me to compartmentalize my guilt, to tell myself I was merely a tool in a predictable game of power. But I lied to you, Goran, and I lied to myself. The order did not come from Malachor. The words fell into the silence like stones into a still pond. Goran's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. It came from my daughter, from Lyra. The confession was so absolute, so shattering, that for a moment, I thought the stone walls themselves would crack. Goran simply stared, his mind refusing to process the words. "She came to me," I continued, the memory now stark and unbearable in its clarity. 2 nights before the Emperor's death. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but in them burned a fire I had never seen before, a desperate, fanatical resolve. "Father," she said, her voice trembling yet firm, "you must do something, something terrible, for the good of the Empire." I laughed. I thought it was the dramatics of a young girl. "What are you talking about, child?" She stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "The Emperor, he is a good man, but he is blind. His policies, his endless wars, they are bleeding the provinces dry. The people suffer. The nobles grow fat and corrupt in his court. He cannot see the rot because he is the source of it. He must be stopped." I was horrified. "Lyra, this is treason. These are the foolish ideas of radical philosophers, not for the ears of the royal apothecary's daughter. Never speak of this again." But she would not be swayed. "It is the only way," she insisted, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "With him gone, Prince Valerius will take the throne. He is young. He is good. He listens to the people. Lord Malachor will guide him, steer him toward peace and reform. Don't you see? It is a terrible price, but it is the only way to save the empire from collapse." I stared at her, my own child, and saw a stranger, a zealot. "You have been manipulated," I told her, my voice cold with fear. "Malachor has filled your head with these lies. He is using you to get to me." "No," she cried. "These are my own thoughts, my own conclusions. Malachor doesn't know I'm here. This is my plan. Mine. You are the only one who can do it. You can make it peaceful. He won't suffer. It will be like falling asleep. You can end his reign of ignorance without violence, without bloodshed in the streets. It is the most merciful act possible." The word merciful from her lips felt like the greatest blasphemy. I refused. I forbade it. I told her I would go to the Emperor himself, confess her treason to save her from herself. And then she said the words that have echoed in the hollow of my soul every day since. I had to stop. The pain as fresh as it had been 2 decades ago. "If you do not," she whispered, her eyes locking with mine, "I will never speak to you again. I will disown you as my father. You are a healer. Heal the Empire, or you are nothing but a coward hiding behind his potions." I looked at Goran, my vision blurring. She gave me an ultimatum. My daughter, the light of my life. She asked me to commit the highest treason, to prove my love for her, to prove that I was the man she believed me to be, a savior, not a servant. She believed, with the unshakable certainty of youth, that one man's death could save millions. So I did it. The admission was a mere breath. I killed the Emperor. Not for Malachor, not for power, but for her. To not lose her. To be the hero she saw in her deluded, idealistic mind. A broken, rasping sound that was meant to be a laugh escaped my lips. But it was all a lie. A beautiful, tragic lie she had been fed. I learned later, much later, that Malachor had indeed found her. He had cultivated her idealism, twisted her compassion, and carefully, expertly, planted the seed of regicide in her mind. He used my own daughter as the ultimate weapon, knowing I could never refuse her. He never gave the order. He merely created the gardener who would make the request. I killed the Emperor for Lyra, and in doing so, I set into motion the chain of events that led Malachor to kill her, to silence her. I murdered her father, and then I became the reason her own father was murdered. I sank back, the last of my strength leaving me. The story was out. The core of the poison was exposed. So you see, jailer, I whispered, the question was never who ordered the Emperor's death. The true question, the one that has festered in this cell for 20 years, is far more terrible. What do you do when a person you love most in the world asks you to become a monster for a cause they believe is just? And what do you become when you say yes? The truth, once fully unleashed, did not bring catharsis. It simply sat in the cell with us, a monstrous, breathing thing. The revelation that Lyra had been the catalyst, the unwitting pawn turned fervent revolutionary, seemed to suck the very air from the room. Goran looked as if he had been physically struck. The story was no longer a tale of a distant, corrupt court. It was a devastatingly intimate tragedy of a father and a daughter, manipulated and destroyed by a master strategist. For a long time, the only sound was the ragged pull of our breath. I had poured out the corrupted heart of my story, and now there was only emptiness and purpose. You have been recording all of this, Goran, I said, my voice a dry rustle, all emotion spent. He looked down at the wax tablets as if seeing them for the first time. They were stacked beside him, a history of poison and regret etched into their surfaces. He gave a single, stiff nod. These are not just the ramblings of a dying man, I continued, pushing myself upright against the wall. The chains felt lighter now, their weight transferred to the words we had created. They are a weapon, the only weapon I have left. His eyes, those hard chips of flint, met mine. A new understanding was dawning in them, sharp and dangerous. A weapon against the regent. A weapon for the Emperor, I corrected softly. The true Emperor, Valerius III. He has lived his entire reign in a cage of his uncle's making, fed lies, surrounded by shadows. He believes his father died of a weak heart. He believes his mother is lost to grief. He believes Lord Theron died of a fever and Lord Valerian of apoplexy. He believes I am a simple traitor, caught plotting against the crown. He knows nothing. I leaned forward, my gaze intense, willing him to understand the final, crucial piece of the plan. Malachor thinks he has won. By throwing me in here, he silences the one man who knows all his secrets. The execution in the morning is not just a punishment. It is the final act of erasure. But he has made one mistake. What mistake? Goran's voice will a low rumble. He gave me you. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was charged electric. Goran's loyalty had always been to his duty, to the law, but I was asking him to look beyond the law, to the truth it was meant to serve. These tablets, I said, gesturing to them, cannot go to the official scribes. They would be destroyed before the ink was cold. They cannot be read aloud in Malachor's court. They must go to the one person who has the right and the power to hear them, the Emperor himself, and to the one person who has the will to act on them. Lord Theron, Goran breathed, the name a statement of understanding. The northern cub has not been idle, I am sure, I said. He lives in the shadows, gathering his strength. He knows he was targeted. He just doesn't know the full scale of the conspiracy. These confessions will be his call to arms, and for the young Emperor, it will be the key to his cage. Goran looked from the tablets to me, a war raging behind his eyes. This was treason. This was the end of his life as he knew it. "Why would I do this?" he asked, though the question lacked force. He was already convinced. "Because you are not a cruel man, Goran," I said. "You are a just one. You have listened to the story of this empire's sickness. You have the cure in your hands. Will you administer it? Or will you let the patient die at dawn, when my head rolls, and the last truth dies with me?" He was silent for a long, agonizing minute. Then, with a resolve that seemed to settle his entire massive frame, he reached out and gathered the wax tablets. He did not stack them neatly. He wrapped them in a strip of oilcloth from his pouch, protecting them from the damp, from prying eyes. It was a gesture of commitment. "The Emperor holds a private vigil tonight in the royal chapel for the soul of Lord Valerian," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "His personal guard will be with him. Malaker's spies will not be. It is the only time he is truly alone." My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, gave a single, painful throb. Hope. It was the most treacherous poison of all, and yet I drank it in. "And Theron?" I asked. "A ghost," Goran said, standing up. "But ghosts have ways of hearing whispers on the wind. If I can get the message to the right beggar in the market, or the right whore in the docks, the ghost will hear." He stood over me, a giant silhouetted against the flickering torchlight. The jailer had become the messenger. The chronicler had become the revolutionary. "What will you do?" he asked. I smiled then, a true, peaceful smile. My work was done. The final ingredient had been added to the brew. "I will drink my last poison, Goran, the one I have saved for myself, not out of fear of the axe, but to ensure that my execution tomorrow is not a spectacle. It will be a quiet, anticlimactic affair. A dead man in a cell. It will buy you time. Malaker will be confused, frustrated. He will not get his public victory. The focus will be on my inexplicable death, not on the jailer who disappears into the night with a bundle of wax and a story that can shatter an empire." I reached into a hidden seam of my tunic, my fingers closing around a small, smooth glass vial. It felt warm, familiar. "Now go," I said, my voice firm, final. "The dawn is coming, and with it a reckoning." Goran gave one last, long look, a look that held no pity, but a newfound, grim respect. Then he turned, unlocked the door, and slipped out into the darkness of the corridor, taking the truth with him. The bolt slid home. I was alone. I brought the vial to my lips. "It is done, Lyra," I whispered to the stones. "The antidote is in the blood." And I drank. The poison was not like the others. There was no pain, no fire, no chilling cold. It was a quiet unraveling, a gentle pulling at the threads of consciousness, like a weaver thoughtfully undoing a flawed tapestry. The weaver's sigh, the very same I had used on the Emperor, now turned on its creator. There was a poetic symmetry to it that I found deeply satisfying. As the darkness at the edges of my vision began to bleed inward, I did not see my life flash before my eyes. I saw only Lyra's face, not as it was in her final, betrayed fury, but as it had been in my workshop, lit by the sun, swinging her legs, her eyes alight with the joy of learning a new remedy. I held onto that image, a final, fleeting antidote to a life of venom. The last thing I heard was not the sound of my own heart slowing, but the distant, frantic shouting from the corridor. It was time. They had found me, but they were too late. The dawn did not bring an execution. It brought confusion. Goran's roar of discovery was genuine, fueled by a performance that would have earned him a place in any royal theater. He burst into the cell as the first gray light filtered through the high, barred window, his face a mask of appropriately bewildered fury. "The prisoner!" he bellowed to the guards behind him. "He's cheated the axe. By the gods, the coward has killed himself." The news spread through the palace like a plague, swift and muttering. The regent Malaker, adorned in his finest blacks for the public spectacle, received the news with a silence more terrifying than any outburst. His plans, so meticulously laid, were now ash. There would be no grand confession on the scaffold, no final, public renunciation of the traitor Kaelen to solidify his own power. There was only a dead old man in a cell, a mystery that bred whispers, not fear. while Malachir scrambled to control the narrative, to spin the suicide as the final act of a guilty conscience. A different story was beginning its journey. In the dim quiet of the royal chapel, the young Emperor Valerius II knelt before the effigy of the fallen Lord Valerian. His vigil had been long, his heart heavy with a grief he could not fully name. The world felt muffled, shrouded in a fog woven by his uncle. The appearance of Goran, his jailer's uniform exchanged for a hooded traveler's cloak, was so unexpected it seemed at first a trick of the tired light. "Your Grace," Goran murmured, falling to one knee and presenting the oilcloth bundle as if it were a holy relic. "A confession from the poisoner Kaelen. He charged me to deliver it only to you." The Emperor, wary, broke the seal on the first wax tablet. His eyes, so like his father's, scanned the precise, grim script. He read of his father's murder, not by a weak heart, but by a calculated dose of weaver's sigh. He read on, his breath catching, his knuckles whitening, the laughing lord's accident, Lady Seraphine's seizure, the fake fever of Lord Theron, the murder of the old wolf, Valerian, and finally, the most devastating blow, the story of Lyra, the idealistic daughter used as a pawn to orchestrate a regicide. The tablets fell from his numb fingers, clattering on the stone floor. The world he knew, the history he had been taught, it was all a lie, a beautiful, poisonous fiction constructed by his uncle. The fog lifted, burned away by the scorching truth. The grief he felt was no longer vague. It was a sharp, targeted rage. "Where's Lord Theron?" the Emperor asked, his voice no longer that of a boy, but of a king. Weeks later, in the stronghold of the northern marches, Theron read the same words by firelight. The ghost had received the message. The confession confirmed his deepest suspicions and laid bare the monstrous scale of Malachir's treachery. It was not just a call to arms. It was a battle plan, detailing the regent's methods, his allies, and his weaknesses. The reckoning did not come with a declaration of war. It came with a single, stark edict from the emperor, read in every town square across the land. It stripped Malachir of his regency, named him a traitor and a murderer, and detailed his crimes, quoting directly from the confessions of his own royal poisoner. The edict was a dose of truth so potent it paralyzed Malachir's supporters. Who could follow a man whose own weapon had so utterly condemned him? They found Malachir in his shuttered solar, staring at the great map of the empire. He did not fight. He simply looked old and tired, his wintry eyes extinguished. The web he had spun for so long had finally ensnared him, woven with the threads of his own crimes. "I do not know what became of my body. It is of no consequence. Perhaps it was thrown into a lime pit, forgotten. But my story did not die in that cell. It lived in the firm set of the young emperor's jaw as he took the full reins of power, his eyes clear for the first time. It lived in the fierce loyalty of Lord Theron, now battle marshal, who helped him purge the court of its rot. It even lived, I hope, in the tentative, grieving smile that finally returned to the face of Queen Anya, freed from the shadow of a lie. The poisoner was gone, but the confession remained, and in the end, the master of venoms had finally brewed his ultimate concoction, not a poison to end a life, but an antidote to save a kingdom. The last truth, once the most corrosive poison of all, had become the source of its healing. The stone walls remembered, and the empire, at long last, began to cleanse itself of the poison. Thank you for watching. First of all, the stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comments section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the cards section at the top right. See you in the next video.
The sun